Now I'd love to introduce our next speakers. First up, we have Stela Lupushor, who is the founder of Amazing Community. We also have our own wonderful Lauren Haggerty, Director of Marketing and Community for PowerToFly. Welcome, ladies. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Meg. And Stela, it is a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm so excited to talk about a plethora of different questions and, of course, all of the great work that you're doing at amazing.community. But I want to start and set the stage for this conversation. Would love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll dive into what amazing.community is in just a second.
Sounds good, Lauren, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this event. And also thank you for everything you do to change how people think about diversity, how organizations create inclusive workplaces, and how we as a society will be better as a result of this. So a little bit about myself. I am geek at heart. I come from a math and computer science background. I spent majority of my career in consulting, management consulting, focused on the human resources and how to utilize technology and analytics in HR's world. And about 4 years ago, I left the corporate world and I went into a solopreneur career and made my mission to humanize the workplace. And I do it in several ways. At the macro level, I work with the conference board. I lead several councils. So these are peer networks, helping them think about the trends that are impacting the modern workplace and how they may adopt practices, policies, how they use technology, how they engage with the organization and the workforce differently. I also consult, and a lot of the work is on employee experience and how you can use technology, analytics, and design thinking to improve it. But the work of my biggest passion is Amazing Community, which is a nonprofit organization focused on expanding the work horizon for women over 45. And I know we'll dive a little deeper later in the conversation.
I can't wait. This is going to be great. And holistically speaking, this conversation is going to be focused on ageism and what we can do to overcome ageism, and of course dive into some of the nuances there. But where I want to start is understanding what are some of the first steps that businesses can take to overcome ageism in regard to returnships and people returning to the workforce.
Absolutely. And it's such a timely conversation since a lot of people did take time, either forced by the events of 2020 or voluntarily stepped out of the workforce. And we've seen statistics about women taking the brunt of those responsibility for caretaking, for homeschooling, and are stepping out of the workforce in record numbers. And it will impact huge part of the population, not just aging, but anyone who stepped out will have a much more difficult time coming back into the workforce. But let me start with, before I dive into what businesses can do, is start with a few framing definitions just to define terms and the scope of the problem we're dealing with. So if we think about ageism, this is really the prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of person's age. The challenge with this type of discrimination is it's a lot more subtle than many other types, because a lot of us experience ageism not just in the second half of our life, but even when you're younger, sometimes that ageism creeps up, and it sometimes feels like you're the perfect age only maybe 1 or 2 days in your career, and then the rest of the time you're either discriminated because you're too young to be recognized or put in certain positions, or too old to stay in the workforce. How that shows up in the organization: sometimes you're removed from projects, sometimes you're replaced by a younger coworker, many times you're not offered up or invested in, so you may not have access to the educational and professional development, you may not necessarily be put as a high potential to be invested in and developed. And more likely than not, this also comes up and shows up in terms of the compensation and the equality that impacts women disproportionately, just because women may not necessarily ask for what they deserve. They may not negotiate their promotion. They may not pursue that next step up that will allow them a higher compensation level, just because they will say, well, I have children to take care of at home. I'm supporting my partner's career, therefore I'm going to stay put and stay low. And all of this compounds over a lifetime and over a career span. The other thing to recognize is that women over 45, they made up 43% of the workforce population in 2016. By 2024, the BLS projects that there will be twice as many working women over 55 than women aged 16 to 24 in the workforce. So we're talking about a huge proportion of the labor force being women in later part of their lives. If we think about the 2020, since February, so a little over a year, the unemployment rate for females over 55 jumped from 3.5% to over 6%. So this has doubled the unemployment rate. And nearly half of this population now is considered long-term unemployed. So long-term unemployment definition is women who have been out of work for 6 months or longer. If we think about the history of the Great Depression in a Great Recession in 2008, we realize that it takes people in a latter part of their lives double the time to find a new job than it does to a younger person. So, and additionally to that, they will not necessarily preserve their income level or the compensation level. And the AARP recently published some statistics that 76% of older workers, they feel that they have a hurdle of finding jobs. So they do experience that ageism. The other very concerning statistics is that 90% of them who found a new role said that they earned less than they previously were earning. So let's bring it back to the topic of women, right? The longer women are out of the workforce, the more difficult it will be for them to get back in. And then the pandemic amplified these trends. And as I mentioned earlier, right? Even if you're not 40 or you're not 45, you will experience certain barriers coming back into the workforce. And from business perspective, what business can do? First of all, consider adding age as a component of your diversity strategy. Right now, only 8% of organizations have that as a consideration. And yes, it cannot be considered as something that will be going away anytime soon, given the demographic changes that we're seeing, given the reduction in labor force participation, given the fertility rate declining in the US. So we need to really think about who is coming into the labor force and who can participate and provide their talent. Maybe that will force organizations to think differently about the entire end-to-end journey and how we define what a career is, from the point where you start attracting people and how you hire, how you select candidates, how you describe what the job entails in those job description, which many times include both sexist and ageist type of comments, how you develop people and who you invest in, how you retain. Having people who are older in your workforce will give an indication and signal to others who may consider coming working for you that it's safe and it is okay. People who are of older age are accepted and can thrive. It will also give women, younger women, role models to aspire to be. The other consideration, big time, is the ways of working. I think a lot of organizations finally recognized the power of technology and the ability for many occupations to be done remotely or to be done in a much more flexible schedule. Those are some of the structural changes that can be made for the long haul. This will provide opportunity for those who may not necessarily be able to commute, or they have children at home or caretaking responsibility at home, to flex those responsibilities and continue to stay in the labor force as opposed to trying to have either full-time work or no work whatsoever. So there's a lot of great opportunities for all of us, especially organizations, to create that environment where anyone can thrive regardless of their circumstances and life stage.
That's incredible. It's such great advice for companies. And, kind of tying into that is the work that y'all are doing at Amazing Community. So tell us a little more about what you are doing at Amazing Community, what it is. You talked a little bit about the mission earlier, but let's dive in a little bit there. How are you helping women 45 plus or people over 45 plus, get back into the workplace?
And it's a perfect tweak that you just made there, because we are a community who together are navigating this digital world, the work of the future, and we are inclusive by design. You cannot solve problem for older people without involving younger. You cannot solve it for women without involving men. It's everyone's responsibility to be part of the conversation, because this is a societal issue. We are all aging from the moment we're born, and ageism is impacting everyone. At some point in time, we'll all experience that. So the more we can collaboratively address this, the better. But a little bit about the genesis. When I left the corporate world, I was going through a soul searching. I was like, is it me? Is it midlife crisis? What's going on? And I started as somebody who does a lot of analytics and studies the demographic changes. It became a research project for me. And I remember reading one statistics that made me sit straight. And it was the fact that women between 55 and 65 constitute almost half of the long-term unemployment in the US. And I just couldn't believe, it's like, how is that possible? Such a small segment making up such a big proportion of the workforce who is unable to have financial security. But when you start thinking about how demographers look at the labor market statistics, right? They track primarily those who are considered working age population. So these are the 15 to 65. After 65, nobody tracks much of what's going on. Unfortunately, most of us are living longer, and we'll probably have another 20 to 30 years after that of productive lifestyle. And many of us will not choose to retire. Many of us will not want to retire, or will not be able to retire and afford it. So we'll continue to stay in employment. Additionally, career is a series of pivots for women, and more frequently than men, just because we tend to follow our spouse or partner's career more likely than not. We will have children and step out of the workforce and make different choices. We will care for our parents, therefore, again, make different choices. So all of those career pivots enrich our skill base and reach our ability to be empathetic and coordinate things and manage multiple projects at the same time. It really penalizes us when it comes to coming back into the labor force. And thinking back at how my career as a people analytics professional, when you design an algorithm to identify which resumes should be reviewed by the recruiter, then reviewed by the hiring manager, a career with many pivots, with gaps in it, will not constitute a top candidate. And that absolutely forces women in very different pathways. And in a way, I see HR as a solution to some of these challenges. So when we think about Amazing Community, there are three components. It's age, it's gender, and it's technology. We believe that technology enables and empowers new occupations. It allows us to work in a very different way. It provides ability for us to transition our superpowers to new spaces and new fields. So what we do is we learn together and get exposed to what is this work of the future looking like? What are the new occupations that are emerging? What are the sectors that are hiring people? And based on what you know and have done before, how might you reimagine what you can do in that future? What are the gaps, and how can you fill those gaps with new skills, with new capabilities? How might you possibly benefit and maybe start a business if you desire to pursue that entrepreneurial pathway? So for us, it's being there in support of women, sharing curated resources, organizing events. And one of the more exciting opportunities we're starting to embark on at the moment is collaboration with the National Innovation Centre for Aging in UK at the Newcastle University. The mission behind this partnership is to work with organizations and help them tap into the wisdom of this group and segment to test some of their products and some of their offerings. Many times, a lot of tools are designed by young kids for young kids. They may not necessarily realize the importance of accessible design. They may not necessarily consider that as you get older, certain body functions may deteriorate. You may not hear as well, or maybe your ability, visual acuity is declining. So how can you design your offerings to be compelling to this age group? So this will not only allow our women to get exposed and educated on some of these new innovations and new things that are coming to the market, but also influence it in a positive way.
It's amazing. And I'm like watching the chat blow up to my right here with lots of good and lots of also, I would say, a little dreary comments about, aging. And I think a lot of us have this fear. And I saw a couple comments, and I can't scroll up that quickly, but saying like, oh no, I'm like planning this pivot. I'm 50 or I'm 60 or I just transitioned. So there seems to be like a lot of concern for, these women that are at this time or, facing this pivot. What advice do you have for these women that are feeling lost or, not quite sure if this is the right move for them? Because it's daunting. I mean, just making that decision to want to come back is so, big and scary and powerful. I'd be curious to hear what your advice is.
It's absolutely okay to feel that way. As with any transition in lives, it is never easy, right? But the way I would suggest and encourage is to really use this as an opportunity for a reset and reflect. We work with many women who come to us and say, I just want a job. I just need to find a job. And then as we start unfolding and unpacking what is it that's going on there and how might we be able to help, we realize that, well, they may be looking for work, which is different than just a job. Or they may be looking for a community, or maybe they're looking to reinvent themselves. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to start exploring multiple options. And if it's just about returning to work, I think it's really important to focus on companies that really either hire and promote their diversity strategies, or companies like PowerToFly that support in this recruitment process and really help you navigate the way companies are hiring nowadays. The other opportunities to possibly sit back and say, do you really want to do the same thing that you've done all your life? Or would you rather do something more meaningful and more purposeful? Maybe it'll take a very different shape than what you've done before. And then consider what that might look like. Is this requirement to work with a coach, possibly to reimagine what that could be? Or maybe join a community of, like our community, to listen to different stories where people share how they pivoted, because that may inspire new ideas for you. Once you understand the direction in which you want to go, you could possibly look at what is it that you have done and are comfortable and really enjoy doing. And then, because those are really your superpowers, and how those might translate to what the organizations might be looking, or this new space might be looking. And figure out if there are gaps in terms of the skills. And there are a plethora of content and educational courses. Some of the certificates that are available were in a matter of 3-4 months, you can really get a new kickstart on the opportunities ahead of you. And it may be that you want to become an entrepreneur and solopreneur. So helping yourself narrow down what that might look like, and building the business plan and building the go-to-market plan would provide you kind of the next step forward. The more important part is not to think about age as a barrier. Think of it as an asset, because you've seen how things work. You have the strength and the flexibility. You're not burned out. You really have a lot of soft skills that many organizations are looking and starting to seek. You can bring teams together. You can resolve conflicts much better. You can manage multiple projects at the same time. All of those are big strengths that any organization can benefit greatly. So my call to action is, do not self-exclude yourself. Really participate, figure out what is it that brings you joy, and then step into that space.
What great advice. And I hope whoever is capturing our quotes grabbed think of age as an asset, not a barrier, because that is incredible. And I think everyone in the chat, you really appreciated these tips too. And it actually kind of nicely ties into this other question that I want to ask, because I also saw some really scary stories about experiences that people have had, or they know of someone who, had something like this happen to them. But I'd love to talk quickly about laws that deal with discrimination against age, and who can you go to when you think you've been discriminated against, and kind of what that looks like. And of course, it's tricky. So I would love to hear your take on that.
It's very tricky, and it's a really important question to be aware, because you need to know your rights. So there is a law that was issued in 1967. It's called the Age Discrimination Employment Act. And it is stipulating that job candidates and employees who are age over 40 are protected by law from facing discrimination. So under the ADEA, employers cannot mention or say that a certain age is preferred in job ads and recruitment materials. They cannot set age limits for training programs. They cannot retaliate against if you file or charge the discrimination help or help with government to investigate some of the charges. They cannot force you to retire a certain age. The other thing is the law prohibits practices and policies that have a disproportionately negative impact on older workers. So these are policies that have, in organizations, they have to be age neutral. Unfortunately, they more likely than not would fall more harshly on older worker. So if you, for example, have a school district that says that they wouldn't hire teachers with more than 20 years of experience, that's typically a discriminatory policy. There is another act that was issued in 1998. So it's called Workforce Investment Act, and it protects all the applicants and employees from discrimination based on age as well, and also protects individuals from discrimination due to race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, and political affiliation or belief. So the challenging part is a lot of these policies or practices that have a disproportionately adverse impact on older workers are unlawful unless the employer can prove they're based on a reasonable factor other than age. And I think this is what it gets very tricky to prove the age discrimination, because they will say, well, there are a few other things that are compounding. Age is just a component. So that's something that really gets in the way of people filing some of the claims. There's a statistic, I believe ARP published not too long ago, that 90% of people over 50 experience ageism, but only 8% of those, or something along those lines, who file a claim. So Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is the best destination for you to file some of these charges. And usually it requires to about within 180 days of the discriminatory action to file the lawsuit. I think it can be extended to 300, but the sooner the better, of course. More importantly, I think people need to call out. So it's not just the legal repercussion, but many times just calling out that, hey, this is ageism in action, and shedding the light on it will also force organizations to start thinking differently about this opportunity or challenges.
Thank you for that, Stella. And that nicely kind of ties into Maura's question, which I think is going to be our last one as I look at the clock tick rapidly ahead. But Maura wants to know, or she says, it's usually put on the candidate to do this, meaning like change this systematic ageism. What can be done in the HR function and with the hiring manager mindset to avoid this ageist, these actions and get them to hire more older workers?
It's such an excellent question. And I truly believe that HR has the key in a way, because it can not only shape the practices that I talked about, right? How organizations hire, how they run interviews, how they promote, how they design the internal compensation practices, retention, etc. But they also can use the data to see where the organization stands. They can look at the pay practices and see whether there is a disparate impact or there is a certain negative trend impacting women or impacting older people. They can look at the hiring slate and see if the hiring pipeline is really adequately diverse. They can look at the retention and see how many people are leaving the organization at what age. So data can have a lot of insights and can inform a lot of the decisions in a positive way. More importantly is about education and speaking up, right? When we talk about diversity, many organizations are still stuck at diversity is just gender. A lot more progressive ones are looking at sexual orientation, are looking at not necessarily only the segments that are required by law to be disclosed and include in your reporting, EEOC reporting. Very few organizations will report on age or care for that matter. So I think it's important to start having the conversations about age. Additionally, educate the hiring managers about unconscious bias people have about age. How would they perceive an older person, and how some of the stereotypes that would perpetuate get in the way of making the choice to bring the right type of candidate to the organization. I've heard stories of women who said, well, I was the perfect candidate, but they told me that they need somebody who has another 10 years in them. It's like, who stays in a role for 10 years or longer nowadays? The average is really shrinking on a very fast pathway down of that tenure. So even stating something like that, of course, is discriminatory, but even considering that you really expect somebody to stay for the long haul and therefore you're not gonna give them the chance at this point in time is really, really a huge problem.
Wow, so much goodness dropped there, Stella. Thank you so much. I can't believe we are at our 30-minute mark, but quickly before Meg takes us away, can you just let us know how the users and viewers can connect with you, how they can join Amazing Community, and anything else that you would like to share?
Absolutely. Amazing.community. That's the website. We are relaunching we have a new website that is being relaunched as of this Friday. So please go join officially so you can get on our distribution list, so you can start engaging in some of these projects we have planned out. And shoot me a note, Stela with one L at amazing.community. I'll love to hear more from your stories and how we may be able to support you.
Yay! You heard it here first, y'all, that she's launching a new website this Friday. How exciting. And thank you so much, Stella. It was a pleasure getting to chat with you and learn from you. So thank you once again for participating. And I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for everyone and everything you do to support women in the workforce.